Hi, I'm Shanda. This trip was supposed to be about family, one last chance to feel like I belonged somewhere. But the moment we arrived, my name wasn't on the reservation, not on the welcome sign, not even on the room key. My mom looked at me and said, "Stop ruining the trip with your sister, just leave." So I did, but I didn't leave empty-handed. I left a bag, a quiet one, with receipts, bank records, even a video they thought I deleted. They thought I was the problem. So why are they the ones scrambling now? You ever wonder what happens when the family you built your life around suddenly realizes you were holding the foundation all along? Yeah, me too. Want to see what they found when I walked out? I came home later than usual that Thursday. Traffic on the 17 had been backed up for miles, and my last Zoom call dragged past 6, as usual. The front porch light was already on when I pulled into the driveway, and I could hear laughter from inside before I even unlocked the door. I walked in with the usual nod toward the living room, not expecting a reply. They were all seated at the long oak table, the one that had seen every Thanksgiving and most arguments since Dad left. Darlene, my mother, had her reading glasses on and was flipping through printed itineraries. Gypsy was halfway through a glass of Chardonnay, and Uncle Hal was doing what he always did best, watching in silence. Nobody turned their head when I closed the door behind me. I dropped my bag next to the shoe rack, hung up my jacket, and walked toward them. "There she is," Darlene finally said without looking up. "We were just finalizing the plan. Gypsy will lead the itinerary. She's better at organizing." It was said like a line rehearsed long ago, one I wasn't supposed to take personally. But there was something about the way she said gypsy and organizing in the same breath, like the two were synonymous. I didn't sit. I hovered, one hand still resting on the back of a chair. "You already decided everything?" I asked lightly. I didn't want to start something, not yet. Gypsy looked up, all sweet smiles and casual dismissals. "Don't worry, Shan, we'll fill you in." She poured herself another half glass like she hadn't just erased me from my own vacation. I waited a beat longer, then took a seat across from Uncle Hal. He nodded once, almost apologetically. But that was the extent of it. No one asked what I'd eaten that day, how work was going, or why my voice was hoarse from presenting for 3 hours straight. Darlene moved on to dinner reservations at the resort. "Let's not make them too fancy. Venus doesn't like fussy food." Venus, not Gypsy. That was her baby name. The name she allowed only family to use. The name I hadn't heard Darlene call me since I was 12. I forced a smile. "Sounds good." Later that night, after they had gone back to the den to rewatch some old Hallmark movie and I was left alone in the dining room, I skimmed through the stack of printed documents left on the table. Resort confirmations, dinner bookings, spa schedules. My eyes caught the passenger list. I ran my finger down the column of names. Darlene Carter, Venus Carter, and at the bottom, plus one guest. No surname, no initials. I flipped to the hotel room assignment. Room 304, Darlene and Venus. Room 405, storage overflow. Nothing for me. I took a breath, slow and steady, before walking to the kitchen for water. On my way, I paused at the corkboard by the fridge, where we always posted trips and menus and school calendars growing up. They'd pinned a seating chart mock-up for the first night's welcome dinner. A rectangular table, sketched in ink. 2 names carefully written at the head. Darlene and Venus. No third name. No chair marked for me. I stood there for a while, letting the cool hum of the refrigerator mask the tightness in my chest. I wasn't crying. I hadn't cried over this kind of thing in years. Not since I was old enough to realize that when you're not remembered, it's because someone decided you weren't worth remembering. I took my phone out and snapped a photo of the chart. Not to send, not to shame, just to have. Then I turned off the kitchen light and headed upstairs, my footsteps barely making a sound. Funny, no room for me at the table, even on paper. The next afternoon, we pulled into the circular driveway of the resort, just outside Scottsdale. It was warm enough to make the air feel heavy, but not quite hot enough to complain out loud. I hadn't spoken much on the drive. Neither had Gypsy, though she managed to hum along to the radio when Darlene played her road trip mix, which hadn't changed since I was in high school. As soon as we stepped out of the SUV, a valet greeted us with a clipboard and white gloves. Darlene immediately lit up. Gypsy adjusted her sunglasses like someone arriving at a press conference, and I reached into the trunk to grab my own bag. Inside the lobby, cool air hummed through overhead vents, and a young woman at the check-in desk smiled with that polished, overly careful customer service smile. "Welcome to Sonoran Winds Resort, Mrs. Carter," she said. "And Miss Venus, we've prepared your welcome packets." She handed over 2 navy blue envelopes. Darlene turned slightly toward me. "She's with us, too," she said, almost as an afterthought. The clerk blinked, then reached under the desk. "Oh, yes. There was one more. Here you go, Miss Guest?" She offered me a white envelope. My name wasn't printed on it. It just said, "Guest of Carter Party, no ID on file." I took it without saying anything. Inside was the same brochure, same dinner schedule, same spa offers. Just not my name, not even a placeholder. My name was in lowercase, like an accident. "Must have been a system glitch," Gypsy muttered, not looking up from her phone. "Don't make this into a thing." I didn't, not out loud. The 3 of us followed a bellhop through terracotta-tiled halls to our villa. Technically a 3-bedroom suite, though Gypsy had already claimed the room with the terrace, and Darlene insisted on the one with the whirlpool tub. That left me with the one next to the laundry closet. Once we dropped off our bags, Gypsy asked, "Should we check the pool?" She wasn't really asking me. We walked out together, though we might as well have been on separate vacations. By the time we reached the pool deck, Gypsy was already complaining. "This isn't what the pictures looked like. Our chairs are facing the back wall. I specifically said I wanted a view." Darlene waved down a pool attendant and began a breathy monologue about travel agent mistakes and expectations. I leaned toward her quietly. "It's probably just a mix-up. Maybe we can rotate." Before I could finish, she turned sharply. "Let your sister settle down. You always make things bigger than they are." My mouth stayed half open, suspended in that tiny moment where I had to choose between defending myself or doing what I'd always done, folding. I took a step back and folded. They ordered margaritas. I asked for iced tea. No one noticed. Later, while waiting in the lobby for our dinner reservations to be confirmed, I wandered toward the front display, a large flat screen with a slideshow looping family welcomes, anniversaries, bridal showers. Then I saw it. "Welcome, Darlene and family. Gypsy, Jonathan." The screen flashed to a photo I hadn't seen in years. One of those staged Christmas photos Darlene had framed on the wall. Gypsy front and center. Darlene in her favorite red scarf. Me? Cropped at the edge. Only the corner of my shoulder remained. I knew the original photo. I remembered standing there, holding the dog, smiling even though I had a cold that day. But here, now, I was background noise. A tree. A blur. I lifted my phone, took a quiet picture of the screen, and put it away. No one noticed that either. Dinner was average. I pushed food around my plate while Darlene praised the resort steak as surprisingly tender. Gypsy talked about Jonathan, her on-again, off-again boyfriend who might show up if his schedule clears. I made the usual polite noises, the kinds of filler responses that patch over silence without ever engaging the wound. When we got back to the villa, Darlene yawned. "Early spa tomorrow. You girls behave." Gypsy retreated to her room without another word. I stayed in the common area for a few minutes, watching the lights fade outside. That's when it hit me. For years, I had been playing the role of the apologizer, the peacemaker, the one who made it easier for them to pretend we were a family that functioned. They didn't ask me to leave. They just never invited me to stay. I stood up, grabbed a pen from the side table, and flipped over my welcome packet. On the back, I wrote 3 words I had no plan for, no timeline, just a truth, not part of. Then, I tore the paper in half and left it under my water glass. When people exclude you gently, you learn to politely disappear. The sky had dimmed to that coppery blue it always gets in the Arizona desert, before slipping into full darkness. I stepped outside for just a minute after leaving the paper under my glass, letting the dry air sting my throat before heading back in. I needed the quiet, even if it only lasted 30 seconds. By the time we walked down to the resort's patio restaurant for dinner, I had tucked whatever resentment I carried back into its usual place, behind my ribs, just under the part that remembers to smile. The hostess showed us to a table near the far end, close to the fire pit. It wasn't the nicest spot, but it had a view. Gypsy didn't like the chairs. "These feel like they were made for toddlers," she mumbled, as she shifted uncomfortably. "Do they not believe in lumbar support here?" Darlene waved over a waiter and gestured toward Gypsy's chair with exaggerated concern. "She has back issues," she whispered, as if Gypsy were royalty with a medical file. "It's a recurring thing, ever since her Pilates instructor pushed her too hard." The waiter gave a tight smile, nodded, and vanished inside. As soon as he was out of earshot, Gypsy picked up her menu and sighed. "I already know I'm gonna hate this place. I mean, if you want to try a different restaurant," I started. Darlene cut in, sharp and immediate. "You should have just let her be. You always have to needle her." The word landed heavier than it should have. Needle. As if I'd poked at her out of spite. As if my suggestion wasn't an attempt to help, but a calculated move to cause irritation. I looked down at my salad. I hadn't touched it. The greens were starting to wilt under the dressing, the edges curling in on themselves. Gypsy eventually pushed her plate away, muttered something about needing air, and stormed off. Darlene sighed heavily. "This is what I meant. She's fragile right now. It doesn't take much." "Right," I said quietly. "Guess I'm always the trigger." Darlene didn't answer. She flagged down the waiter to ask about dessert. After dinner, we walked back toward the villa. The resort path was lit with subtle ground lights, spaced just far enough apart to make the shadows stretch long between them. Gypsy walked ahead with Darlene, just out of earshot but not out of range. "I swear," Gypsy said, not bothering to lower her voice. "She's just a little storm that never passes." They both laughed. A short, mean kind of laugh that people think you can't hear if you're behind them. I stopped walking for a second. Not because the comment surprised me, it didn't, but because hearing it so casually confirmed something I'd suspected for years. They had a name for me. Not Shanda. Not even a version of my name. Just a title. A label. I didn't respond. I just kept walking after a pause, dragging my feet a little on the gravel path so they wouldn't hear how steady my breathing was. Back inside the villa, everyone settled in like nothing had happened. Darlene went to her room to rest her eyes, which always meant phone calls with cousins we never see. Gypsy kicked off her shoes and curled up in the middle of the couch, flipping through TV channels. I lingered for a while, unsure where to sit. The love seat had a throw blanket folded neatly on it, Gypsy's. Darlene had claimed the recliner earlier that morning. I grabbed the folding chair from the corner and set it near the balcony door, the only spot left. Technically, no one had claimed it, but that was the point. "You good over there?" Gypsy asked, without looking away from the screen. "Yep," I replied. "Perfect view of the plants." She laughed once. That hollow, practiced laugh she used when she didn't care what I said. I sat there for a few minutes, pretending to watch the news with them, before I got up and headed to my room. It wasn't late, but my body felt heavy, like my bones were quietly trying to excuse themselves. Once in bed, I didn't sleep. I lay on my side, staring at the slats of light spilling in through the half-closed blinds. My mind wasn't replaying what they'd said. It was cataloging. Not out of bitterness, not out of shock. Just for clarity. No name on the welcome packet, no photo on the screen, no seat at the dinner chart, no voice in the conversations, no defense. even when blamed. I wasn't taking notes to remember. I was taking notes to make sure I'd never forget again. By the time the sun was fully up, the patio outside our villa was already buzzing with distant laughter and pool splashes. I stayed in bed longer than usual that morning, not because I was tired, but because I needed to calculate how much of myself I was willing to lose today. Around 10, I made my way down to the front desk. I told them I needed a replacement room key. I'd left mine somewhere, probably by the balcony table after last night's conversation with no one. The young woman behind the counter smiled politely, then typed something into the system. Her brows furrowed. "I'm sorry. It says here that only Darlene Carter and Venus Carter are authorized on the room." I tilted my head. "That's strange. I've been staying with them." Another few keystrokes. "There's a note that says, 'No third guest listed on confirmation. You're listed here.'" She turned the screen briefly. "As guest of Venus Carter. No photo ID on file." I didn't respond right away. I let her words hang in the air long enough to hear the silence behind them, the kind that gets louder the longer no one says anything. Then I smiled. Not the kind you give to show you're fine, but the kind you use when you've moved past pretending to be surprised. "No problem," I said. "I won't need a new key after all." She blinked. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." I walked out of the lobby and back toward the resort's garden cafe. Gypsy was already there, lounging under one of the canopies, mimosa in hand, a pair of oversized sunglasses pushed to the bridge of her nose. Darlene sat across from her, leafing through a brochure like she was researching a second home. "I tried that citrus body wrap last time," Darlene said, "but it left me itchy. I think I'll do the sea mud this time, purifying, cleansing." Gypsy chuckled. "You and your mud baths." I pulled out a chair but didn't sit. Darlene looked up, just briefly. "Did you sleep okay?" "Fine." She went right back to her pamphlet. And then, unprompted, in the same casual voice she might have used to comment on the weather, she said, "You know, Venus was born in the spring. Everything was blooming. Even the neighbors brought over a pie. You came that winter when everything was falling apart, during the divorce. It was hard to remember the joy." Gypsy didn't react, just took another sip of her drink. I didn't move. Darlene turned a page. "It's not your fault, of course. Timing is everything." That sentence stayed with me all the way through lunch, past the walk back to the villa, and well into the afternoon, when I sat alone on the balcony, watching palm fronds sway against a sky that couldn't decide if it wanted to be cloudy or clear. The air was dry, but it still held that hint of chlorine and sunscreen, summertime smells I used to associate with long drives and bad radio stations. Now it just reminded me of spaces I didn't belong in, even when I was physically present. I thought back to something I hadn't allowed myself to revisit in years. It was 8 years ago. I had just moved to Seattle for a job that ended up falling through the week I arrived. I didn't call home. I didn't ask for help. I slept on an air mattress for 4 weeks while working 2 part-time jobs and somehow still managed to make rent. I remember one night eating oatmeal 3 times in a row and thinking, no one knows I exist right now. And weirdly, that thought didn't crush me. It freed me. I wasn't helpless then. I'm not helpless now. Inside the villa, Gypsy's voice rose. She was on the phone, probably Jonathan again. The words were muffled, but the tone carried the same manufactured crisis I'd heard since we were kids. Darlene laughed at something in response. Like old times, like nothing was broken. I stood up from the balcony and walked back into my room. Pulled out my phone, opened a travel app, booked a return flight, just like that. Departure, Sunday night. 1 seat. Direct. I didn't pack. Not yet. But I'd stopped wondering whether I was being dramatic. I'd stopped asking if I was the one making things bigger than they were. The answer was simpler now. They made the house. They picked the seats. They drew the lines. And all I did was finally step outside of them. The door didn't need to slam for me to know I'd already walked out. The sun was slipping behind the mountains by the time I made it back from the garden path. Dinner had ended awkwardly again. Gypsy left the table early after making a scene over her wine being too warm, and Darlene blamed the whole thing on the energy I bring into rooms. I didn't respond then. I had already started choosing which battles weren't worth another bruise. Back at the villa, the air was too still. Even the ceiling fan above the patio made more sound than the people I'd spent the week pretending were my family. I stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the patio, holding a half-empty glass of water, listening to Darlene muttering from the sofa. Her voice always shifted just slightly when she thought I wasn't listening, tilted toward performance. "She's always so tense," she said to Gypsy, who sat cross-legged on the arm of the couch scrolling her phone. "It's like she's allergic to joy," Gypsy chuckled. "It's because she doesn't know how to relax. She thinks being uncomfortable makes her more important." I didn't interrupt. I put my glass in the sink and walked past them, back into the hallway. "Hey!" Darlene called out, suddenly louder. "You're not gonna throw a fit, are you?" I stopped. Not because I was going to throw anything, but because I realized they needed me to. That was the part I'd been playing for years, quiet until provoked, then defensive enough to make them feel like victims. So I turned around and leaned slightly against the archway, calm and clear. "What exactly am I supposed to be throwing a fit over?" Darlene scoffed, rolling her eyes like I was being unreasonable for asking a reasonable question. "Gypsy's already upset. She came here to relax, not to walk on eggshells." I glanced at Gypsy. Her face didn't flinch. She just kept scrolling. "You've been sulking this whole time," Darlene went on. "Honestly, maybe you should just go home if you can't enjoy yourself like the rest of us." There it was, laid out as neat as a place setting. I straightened up. Fine. Not dramatic, not loud, just final. I walked into my room, unplugged my phone from the charger, slipped it into my pocket. I grabbed my wallet and car key, then hesitated only a second before unzipping the small duffel bag I'd carried in 2 days ago. I pulled out the folder I'd packed, but never unpacked. Inside were copies of financial records, house deeds, insurance documents, things no one ever asked about because no one ever thought they'd be important. I didn't bring my full suitcase. That was intentional. Let them stare at it in the corner for a few hours, or days, before they realized I hadn't forgotten it. Outside, the air was cooler than I expected. I stepped off the porch and into the gravel path that led toward the main lobby. I didn't look back, not even when I heard the sliding glass door open behind me. "Shanda, where are you going?" Darlene's voice followed me like a mosquito. "To get some air," I said without turning. "That's not what this is about," she barked. "You're being dramatic again." But I wasn't. I was done. I made it to the resort's curb just as a black sedan pulled up, called from the app a half hour earlier, when I'd booked the return flight. The driver greeted me by name, asked if I had bags. "Just this," I said, lifting the duffel. As we pulled away, I glanced back toward the villa. Through the window, I could still see Darlene's silhouette pacing. Gypsy was sitting on the couch, holding her phone up like a mirror. They were still talking, probably about me, still filling the room with explanations and assumptions and justifications. All of it swirling in a loop that didn't include me anymore. That was the part they hadn't grasped yet. They thought the control was in the volume. The louder one wins. But silence, when it's chosen, is heavier than shouting. And I had already chosen it. They wouldn't notice what I left behind until they needed it. The passwords, the card on file, the name on the lease. The folder zipped inside the suitcase, sitting quietly by the TV stand. They wouldn't know what's missing until it's too late. The next morning crept in slow and hazy. Scottsdale air always seemed gentler on Sundays, as if the desert itself took a break from the heat. But inside the villa, nothing felt light. Gypsy was the first to find the bag. I wasn't there to watch her unzip it, but I could picture it. Her painted nails hesitating over the zipper, not out of fear, but that spoiled uncertainty she always wore when touching something she hadn't been told was hers. "Did she really just leave this?" she asked. Darlene barely looked up from her coffee. "She'll come crawling back. She always does." But when Gypsy pulled out the folder tucked neatly inside, her breath caught. That sound, I imagined, was the first honest inhale she'd taken in years. The sound of someone recognizing a threat written in ink. Receipts, bank statements, screenshots. Not pages of rage or accusations, just quiet evidence. Printed copies of charges made on a credit card she never realized was mine. The airline bookings, the resort reservations, spa packages, even the overpriced brunch Darlene insisted we all pretend to enjoy. And then there were the messages. Printed out, not just stored digitally. Pages and pages of text threads between Gypsy and someone named Jason. "Don't worry," Jason had written. "Your sister's rich. She doesn't even notice this stuff." Another message. "She won't cut you off. She's too proud." One more. "Just keep blaming stress. She's always been the weird one." At the bottom of the stack sat a screenshot. A single message from Darlene to Gypsy, dated 4 months prior. "We'll keep her quiet like always." For the first time in years, I think they both went silent. Later that morning, Darlene picked up the resort phone to try and book another spa session. She always did that after something shook her. Find comfort in steam and cucumber water. But the card didn't go through. She tried again, then again. Each time, the same tone echoed back from the desk staff. "I'm sorry, ma'am. This card is inactive." That's when she looked at Gypsy. "Whose card did we use for this trip?" Gypsy blinked. I thought it was the travel agent's." Darlene narrowed her eyes. "What travel agent?" The phone went quiet in her hand. The paper stack still sat on the counter, refusing to burn even under their stares. "I don't get it," Gypsy said finally. "Why would she keep all this?" Darlene didn't answer right away. She just walked over to the kitchen counter and sat down slowly, like the floor had shifted under her feet. "Because," she muttered, "she always knew we'd pretend she didn't matter." That answer hit harder than either of them wanted to admit. Backtracking came fast after that. Gypsy opened her phone and started deleting messages. Some she hadn't even read twice before. But the damage was already done. Some of those messages weren't just screenshots. Some had been printed, time-stamped, forwarded to backup email addresses. They weren't just secrets anymore. They were history. Their words, preserved not as weapons, but as witness. Outside the villa, the sun climbed high. They stayed inside. And me? I watched from a different place entirely, not hidden, just away. Across town, at a quiet Airbnb with a balcony view and no need to explain why I'd left. From there, I pictured them moving through the silence like people in a museum, stepping around exhibits they didn't want to admit they created. I'd left them paper cuts, small truths sharp enough to bleed slowly, and paper cuts hurt more when no one knows how to stop the bleeding. The following day began like any other checkout morning, quiet, tense, and heavy with unspoken things. But this time, I wasn't the one feeling it. Across town, I sat on the balcony of a modest Airbnb in Sedona. I sipped tea out of a chipped mug while watching a hummingbird hover near a potted lavender plant. No noise, no backtalk, no walking on conversational landmines, just stillness. It was strange how quickly peace becomes addictive. Back at the villa, the unraveling had begun. Darlene had woken up irritated. The coffee machine blinked, "Clean me," in passive-aggressive rebellion, and Gypsy couldn't find her sunglasses. Petty inconveniences they would have normally tossed my way like crumbs, but I wasn't there to catch them this time. They tried calling me around 9:15 a.m. "Straight to voicemail," Gypsy muttered, checking her phone again. Darlene snorted, still in her robe. "She's just being dramatic. She wants us to worry." "She's not that calculated," Gypsy said, less certain than she sounded. Another try. Message delivered. The screen read, but it sat there, unread. Darlene eventually called the front desk. "Can you confirm whether Ms. Shanda A. is still checked in?" A pause. The receptionist answered plainly, "She checked out early this morning, ma'am. No forwarding request." That was the moment the atmosphere shifted. "Where did she go?" Gypsy asked, staring down at her screen like it would start offering clues. Darlene didn't answer. She walked over to the kitchen, opened the fridge, closed it again without grabbing anything. Then came the second blow. She pulled up her phone to schedule a massage for noon, a last-ditch attempt to reset her nerves. As she entered her credit card number, the app blinked back a red error. "Payment declined." She tried again. Another card. Same result. She called the front desk again, this time with less composure. "There must be a problem with your system. My reservation was secured under Carter Family Billing." The reply was colder than she expected. "Billing was tied to a corporate business card ending in 3017. Authorization has been revoked." "That's Shanda's card," Gypsy said under her breath. Darlene froze. "No, that can't be right. That account was for family travel." Gypsy didn't look up. "It was never ours. It was hers. I told her I'd reimburse." Darlene's voice cracked mid-sentence, a rare glitch in her controlled register. It was just enough of a tremble to expose the fear crawling in. Still, the full weight didn't land until she picked up the landline and called her lawyer. "I just need a quick verification," she said. "It's about the house." A pause on the other end. "Ma'am, the deed is under Ms. Shanda A's name. You are listed as a tenant only." Silence. You could hear it settle like fog in a cold room. "No," she said slowly. "That can't be right. That house was gifted to me." "Not legally," the attorney replied. "Would you like us to email you the scanned documents?" "But I raised her." It wasn't an argument. It was a gasp, a plea tossed into an empty hallway and left unanswered. In Sedona, I sat back in my chair, letting the breeze hit my face. I wasn't spying, but let's just say that when people leave their digital tracks wide open, you don't have to look hard to see the footprints. Darlene had built a small kingdom of control, rules hidden inside favors, dependence disguised as generosity. But I had stopped signing her illusion years ago. The power she thought was hers was only on loan, and I had quietly decided not to renew the contract. Across 2 towns and a lifetime's worth of silence, I could picture Gypsy pacing, trying to explain to her credit card company why a payment bounced. I could see Darlene frantically tapping through old emails, looking for proof of an ownership that never belonged to her. No yelling, no confrontation, just quiet reversals. When you've been invisible for long enough, disappearing feels like a superpower. I didn't leave in a rage. I didn't write a manifesto. I didn't take anything that wasn't already mine. But I took back the only thing that had ever mattered to them: control. Turns out I didn't need to be there to win. The last morning at the resort didn't begin with shouting, but with silence. That heavy kind. The kind that fills a room when people have nothing left to spin. I arrived at the hotel conference room just before 9 a.m., a short walk from the main lobby, tucked between 2 oversized water features that gurgled with fake tranquility. The hotel manager greeted me at the door, politely, but without small talk. He knew this wasn't about spa credits or misplaced luggage. Inside, the room was already arranged. A U-shaped table, water pitchers, notepads that no one would use. Darlene sat with her arms crossed tight against her chest. Her blazer looked stiffer than usual. Gypsy was next to her, tapping the edge of her phone against her thigh. The hotel GM stood near the back wall, awkward but neutral. I walked in with my attorney, a woman named Rena. Calm, sharp. Her energy was like a scalpel, quiet until needed. No one said hello. I placed my folder on the table and stayed standing. "I asked for a room," I said plainly. "Not permission." Darlene's jaw twitched. "You didn't need to go behind our backs." I tilted my head slightly. "Is that what you think this is?" Rena stepped forward, opening her own file. "Let's keep this brief," she said. "We're here to clarify financial misrepresentation and property records. Ms. A is not seeking damages at this time, only legal clarity and enforcement." She laid out the documents one by one. First, a copy of the house deed. Darlene Carter is listed as resident. The property is solely owned by Shanda A. Next, statements showing Shanda's direct payments into the Carter family's household utilities and maintenance for the past 3 years. Each one logged and signed. Then came the resort booking receipts. Flights, spa packages, meals, all billed to a corporate card under Ms. A's name, Rena said. Darlene tried to interrupt. That's not the full story. Ma'am, Rena said firmly, please wait. Darlene leaned back, lips pressed so tight her lipstick cracked. Gypsy shifted uncomfortably in her chair, glancing toward the hotel manager like she hoped someone would save her. I didn't flinch. I pressed a small tablet onto the center of the table and tapped play. A video lit up the screen. Dated 3 years ago. Gypsy, sitting on my apartment floor, mascara smeared under her eyes, clutching a nearly empty wine glass. I messed up, Shan. I didn't think he'd really leave. I'm 2 months behind, and if I lose this place, her voice cracked. I just need one more chance. I was off camera in the video, but my voice was clear. I'll wire the rent tonight, but this is the last time. The video ended with me typing on my laptop. No one spoke. I didn't expect them to. This wasn't about starting a conversation. I stood still for a moment, let the silence do the heavy lifting. Then I looked straight at Darlene. I don't want apologies, I said. I want space. And I want silence to mean something now. Rena nodded to me. I picked up the tablet, slipped it back into my bag. We'll be in touch about the house by Wednesday. Gypsy opened her mouth, but I turned before she could speak. Some words don't need responses. Some people don't deserve the last word. As we stepped into the hallway, Rena leaned slightly toward me. They looked like they'd been hit by a truck. They were, I said. It just moved slow. I didn't glance back. Not even once. You won't have to wonder what happens next. I already wrote it. The air felt different in upstate New York. Crisper. More honest somehow. A week had passed since the resort confrontation, and I was back home, or rather, at the place I'd chosen to call home after too many years of living somewhere out of guilt. The house was smaller than Darlene's, older too. But it had a sunroom that caught the morning light just right, and a screened porch where you could hear crickets at night instead of constant disappointment. I unpacked slowly. 2 bags. That was all I brought back. No souvenirs. No leftover arguments. Just clothes, work documents, and the kind of silence I had earned. There were no family photos on the walls. Just art I liked. Quiet lines. Pieces that didn't shout. For the first time in a long time, I had rooms that didn't remind me who I used to be. That Monday morning, my phone buzzed. It was Rena. The transfer process is in motion, she said. They'll receive official notice today. I leaned against the kitchen counter, watching the kettle steam. They can't afford the taxes, Shanda, she added. I smiled faintly. They'll learn. We ended the call, and I sat at my desk with 2 plain envelopes. No return address, just handwriting, mine, that had finally stopped shaking. The first letter was to Darlene. You once told me I was born in the wrong season, that my timing ruined everything. Maybe it did. Maybe I did arrive during winter, when everything was falling apart. But that wasn't my fault. And it wasn't my burden to fix. You chose to forget me. I chose to remember myself. You won't be hearing from me again, not out of anger, but because I don't have anything left you can take. I sealed it. No signature. The second was for Gypsy. What I gave you, I gave without condition. I never kept score. Not until you made it clear I was just a tool in your version of survival. What you took, you can keep. But the access ends here. Your debts are yours now. I won't pretend otherwise anymore. That one I signed. Just my first name. Nothing more. Later that afternoon, I walked to the mailbox down the street. The wind had picked up. Leaves were doing that dance where they never quite land. I dropped the letters in and stood there for a moment, not because I doubted it, but because I knew that was the real goodbye. There was no funeral for the version of me they used to know, no eulogy, just a quiet burial of an identity I'd outgrown. Back inside, I made tea. The old way. No rushing, no distractions. Just water, heat, and stillness. This isn't about revenge. It never was. It's about recognition. About finding out who I am when no one's asking me to play a role. When there's no list to check, no guilt trips to respond to, no performance to uphold. Some people would call it healing. I just call it choosing myself. Some endings don't explode. They just stop. And thank God for that.